Well, welcome to the Dr. Gundry Podcast. And today we're speaking with Dr. Will Cole, the author of Ketotarian. It's available for pre-order right now, and it's going to be out on August 28th, which is just a couple days. So this book covers the mostly plant-based plan to burn fat, boost your energy, crush your cravings, and calm inflammation. Pretty big claims, Dr. Cole. So tell me more about this.
Yeah, so it was really born out of my clinical experience in seeing patients for the past decade plus and seeing what works, what doesn't on labs and how patients feel. And myself, it also was born out of my own wellness journey. I grew up my parents were into wellness, so in the 80s and 90s in rural Pennsylvania, I was the kid drinking weird herbs and botanical tonics, and not the most common thing you'll find in the 80s and 90s in Pittsburgh, but that was me. And so I grew up into wellness, and then in my late teens, I learned about CAFOs and factory farming and our food supply, and I did the well-intentioned thing at 18 and 19 and became more plant-based and a vegan for 10 years. And then my health was declining over that 10 years. I wasn't feeling good. I had digestive issues. I had fatigue. I wasn't doing so well. And I had to come to grips with, was I eating optimally for my body? And then that's also around the time that I found functional medicine at Southern California University of Health Sciences. I heard of a guy called Karazian, who you may know. I mean, he's one of the kind of forefathers of functional medicine, still speaks for IFM. And that's when I kind of learned, hey, look, was I eating optimally for my biochemistry? And that's when I started shifting to this more ketotarian way of eating, which is why I wrote Ketotarian. It's this plant-centric, ketogenic approach where it's the amalgamation of the best of both worlds. And that's really where Ketotarian was born out of.
Okay, so that actually brings up a lot of great points because, as you know, I was a professor at Loma Linda University for many years, and I was eating mostly a vegetarian diet. And as you talk about in the book, that I take care of a lot of vegetarians and vegans, and I call them pasta and grain and breaditarians. And they're not truly what I think you and I would think of as vegetarians. I myself now, I call myself a veg aquarian because I eat primarily vegan during the week, and then I eat primarily shellfish or occasional wild fish on the weekends. And it sounds like, as I've read your book, that that's pretty much what you're advocating as well. Why do you think that you had kind of lousy health as a vegan? Let's hear it from your own words.
Yeah, so and I definitely depended on carbs to varying degrees just to get through the day, calorically and just energy-wise, and that was the selection of food in the grocery store that were available to me, and they're normally delicious too when you're depending on all the sugar and carbs. So it was the healthier food option, right? It was the sprouted grains, it was the different varying treats, vegan treats. A lot of it was whole foods, but it came down to legumes and sprouted grains and lectins from breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that worked for a time. And what I kind of see now is certainly I would say it's better than the standard American diet, but just because something's better doesn't make it optimal. And I have autoimmune conditions on both sides of my family. I have the MTHFR, the C677T location, so my body's not that good at methylating. So I had a lot of things that it was a matter of time before I had to start realizing that I couldn't depending on these grains and legumes for my primary caloric intake. So yeah, that was my experience.
Yeah, and that's certainly what I see in my practice. It's interesting you bring up lectins, and we'll come back to lectins in a minute. But since the name of your book is Ketotarian, the ketogenic diet is a big buzzword these days, and we're going to talk about the pros and the cons. So, for everybody who's listening, what is the ketogenic diet and what's the benefits of going keto?
So there's two main forms of fuel for our body. There's sugar burning fuel and fat burning fuel. And most of us in the West are in sugar burning modes to varying degrees, from the standard Western diet where you have more of the dirty fuel fueling the body, to the plant-based world and more of the real food movement. They're all to varying degrees of sugar burning mode. Even the paleo world with all the paleo treats and the grain-free carb options there. And that is akin to kindling on a fire. It will cause a flame, a burst of fuel, but you'll have to refuel often. And then the alternative is nutritional ketosis, which is it's becoming a fat burner and allowing your body to produce naturally ketones for fuel. So you can get off the blood sugar roller coaster, so to speak. You don't get hangry as much and irritable and fatigued, and you can be more sharp cognitively and burn fat if that is a goal for you. So that is nutritional ketosis. And being a functional medicine practitioner, I'm on a ketogenic podcast as well for the past years, and I have seen how the keto world gets it wrong. And they depend a lot on any old meat and any old dairy, as long as it's high fat and low carb. And they see the initial benefits because they're off all the carbs and they're off the lectins. So they see the immediate benefit, but long-term wellness, which is what I'm really concerned about, is my concern with the conventional ketogenic diet. So that's why part of the reason why I wrote Ketotarian too is I saw all the unintentional mishaps that were happening, the pitfalls that were happening in the keto world.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's as you know, I have a whole chapter in the Plant Paradox on the ketogenic intensive care program. And I think a big mistake that my friends in the paleo community make, and most of the ketogenic community make, is they equate high protein and high fat and low carb with long-term benefit. And I think I do, as probably you do, I follow a lot of, number one, inflammatory markers, but also I'm a fanatic about keeping insulin-like growth factor as low as possible, and also insulin as low as possible. And I'm incredibly impressed looking at my patients who try these paleo ketogenic diets, high meat and high fat, that their insulin-like growth factors are very high. And you're right, they definitely have some health benefits because they've removed a lot of lectin-containing foods. And I think that's one of the probably uniting features of low-carb diets. Indirectly, whether they knew it or not, they were taking lectins out of their life. But then I think it's a great start, but I think your voice, and hopefully my voice, is going to convince people that there's even a better way to do ketosis than this high meat, high animal fat diet.
Absolutely. So, and I think a lot of people equate the ketogenic diet with that approach, with what they're seeing on Instagram and social media and the ketogenic books that are out there. But you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. You can still get in on all the amazing clinical applications, the health benefits of ketosis, without falling prey to depending on these inflammatory foods that aren't good long term.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You know, I think one thing I will give I hate to use the word traditional ketogenic plan, if there is such a thing, but I think it does give people coming from a standard Western diet an entry point. Okay, I'm going to let you have your pound of bacon every day. Oh, good. And, I'm not going to have to eat 12 avocados every day to achieve this. I can have my bacon and avocado instead. And then maybe like Mark Twain used to say, habit is habit and not to be taken lightly, since you brought up Mark Twain, not to be thrown out the window like bathwater, but coaxed down the stairs one step at a time. And I like the idea that your ketotarian diet there's eggs in there, and you've got some grilled salmon in there. So you're not you're not building a firewall and say, okay, guys, you've got to be a vegan, but here's the type of vegan I want you to be.
Exactly. Yeah. So I that's why I gave sort of three different avenues in ketotarian. There are vegan keto options. So we both know there are people out there that their personal preference or religious or ethical reasons, they'll never bring eggs or fish into their diet. So I still wanted to give them, okay, here's a better option for you to be vegan. And there's many people that want to try ketosis, but they're adamant vegans. And then obviously the more you're open to eating more foods in for your health, for these vegetarian keto and pescatarian keto options in the book, I think it's really this great alchemy between being plant-centric and being keto.
So let's talk about as we both practice functional medicine. I call it restorative medicine. Jeff Bland calls it functional medicine. That's okay, but there's a lot of people who enter your practice and my practice who have high insulin levels. They're insulin resistant, they're pre-diabetic or diabetic, and how do you get them safely to get into a ketogenic diet without getting the low-carb flu, without getting the Atkins flu? What have you learned the tricks along the way?
I find in Ketotarian, I put all the cool science stuff for the person that's already kind of knowledgeable about this stuff and maybe eats a cleaner diet, and then they're ready to be plant-based keto. And I realized that, knowing the patients that I've seen over the years, there are many people that are starting on square one or close to square one. So I kept, for every science-based evidence, like more of the advanced track, there's keeping it simple options too. And so instead of jumping those people that want to keep it simple right into ketosis, I just tell them to focus on these real foods and be in the general ballpark of being moderate healthy fat to high healthy fat, moderate protein, low carbs, obviously waking up their gallbladder, waking up their liver, because most of these people aren't used to eating real food fat. So we kind of have to get the digestion working well and fat metabolism, and basically leaning them in to ketosis so they aren't going too fast too soon, and then they feel like they're a failure because they're rushing into it. And we both know wellness is a journey, and sometimes you have to take baby steps in leaning into it for the greater good of sustainability. And for some people, for sure, they can jump right into it because they've already been at this journey for a while. So I wanted to meet the reader where they're at, and like
more
than anybody, everybody's at a different point in that journey when we meet them.
Right. And so you bring up a good point, and it's a point that you make in your book over and over again. There are good fats and bad fats, and to the general reader or to the general watcher, well, what do you mean? Fat is fat for ketosis, and I just need to eat fat. So enlighten us about that.
Yeah, so there are three types of fat. There's saturated fats, there's polyunsaturated fat, and monounsaturated fats. So the saturated fats typically get the bad rap, in the conventional setting. And I talk about the fact that they're definitely unhealthy saturated fat, but when you talk about the beef out there or the conventional saturated fat, it's not so much the saturated fat that's the problem, it's what we've done to the food source and the way that cows are fed and bred. And again, you talk about that at great length in Plant Paradox, but the quality of the dairy and the fats that people are getting are not what they once were. And then there's the monounsaturated fat, which is the nuts and seeds, the olives, the avocados, and then the polyunsaturated fats, which are the fish omega fats, which are amazing, and nobody's going to disagree with that. But then there's the more refined polyunsaturated fats, like the vegetable oils, the canola oils, and those are not in the whole food form, and they are highly inflammatory. They're high omega-6. They're oxidized many times. They can be rancid easily to heat and light, and those are inflammatory too. So that is sort of the nuanced perspective of that. And in Ketotarian, we're focusing on these stable, real food, healthy fats that are great for our heart, great for our brain, great for our immune system. So it's definitely something that people shouldn't be fearful of. They just need to be going for the right kinds, and healthy fats are essential for human biochemistry.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just my next book is called The Longevity Paradox, and it'll be out in March. But I've been a big reader of all of Ancel Keys' work through the years, and in the ketogenic and in the high-fat culture, he is demonized. But it's interesting, if you actually look at his work and all of his writings, he actually never came down hard on fats. He came down on animal sources of saturated fat. And he never, I think, actually made the connection that animal saturated fats, most people eat them as a process of eating animals in which they were contained. And it may be that the animal protein is just as mischievous, if not more so, than the animal fat. But what's fascinating to me about him is that he actually retired to the south of Italy, and he lived in the village next to Acciaroli, south of Naples, where they have the highest number of people over 100 of any group ever studied. And I've actually interviewed his housekeeper, and he ate huge amounts of olive oil. And of course, how could he not, living there? But it's interesting, you actually never see him condemn olive oil or monounsaturated fats or plant fats. He, was after animal-based saturated fats. So I think in a way he got a bad rap. And he lived to 102. So he's actually the longest lived nutritionist on the planet. He's actually tied, just as an aside, there's an amazing book about how to live to 100 by Luigi Carnero, and I don't know if you've ever read it. It's still available. It was written in the 1500s. 1500.
Wow.
And get it, it's on Amazon, but he started at about age 50 and was a really sick guy eating basically a Western diet in the 1500s, and his doctors told him he was going to die real soon if he didn't change his ways. So he actually went on a calorie-restricted diet, but it also included 500 milliliters of good red wine every day. And he chronicled his life every 5 to 10 years as a chapter in this book, and he actually lived to 102. So those two guys are the longest living nutritionists.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're gonna be the third.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, in our office, we tell patients that 150 is the new 100. So, so we're working on it. We're working on it. Well, yeah. So, I think your point is so well taken in your book that, yeah, fats are not to be feared, but what we've got to do is choose the fats that are going to benefit our health rather than hinder our health. And, congratulations on doing that.
Thank you.
So, I know what happens in my practice, but describe what happens in your practice. When do people start seeing the benefits of going ketotarian?
So, the initial response is they start getting fuel pretty quickly because they're going off of a lot of these inflammatory foods, and they are the amazing clinical applications of ketosis. So beta-hydroxybutyrate is metabolic fuel. It's a cleaner fuel. It's like log on the fire instead of that kindling. So it's more sustainable. You get less hangry. You can go longer times without having to refuel. You're not even thinking really about the next meal because you're eating until you're satiated. So it's it's the anti-diet really, because you're not bound by the next meal and depriving yourself of food. So you're enjoying the food, which makes it so sustainable for people. And they can randomly go into intermittent fasting, which, as you know, has many benefits as well, and enhances ketosis during intermittent fasting, enhances autophagy, or cellular repair, so their brain is working more clearly. And I love, and I know you love too, the amazing anti-inflammatory benefits that beta-hydroxybutyrate has, because most of our patients are somewhere on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum, where they're in this pro-inflammatory state, their insulin is high and erratic, and it's just this calming, stabilizing effect that nutritional ketosis has. And in ketotarian, and I think this is maybe the argument that's being made in the ketogenic world and people that are kind of criticizing the keto movement, is that should you be in ketosis forever and ever, amen. Well, in ketotarian, I say, well, go at least 8 weeks to experiment with your body in calming inflammation, becoming a fat burner, allowing ketones to fuel your brain and metabolism, and then from there, we can personalize it. And that's really the heart of restorative medicine, functional medicine, is making it work for the individual. And from there are definitely people that can handle more carbs than other people. So fruits and sweet potatoes, some people can go in and out and do more of a cyclic ketotarian approach. Some people will do it more seasonally, like our ancestors probably had done during the summer, enjoying more fruits and starches from real foods and then going back into ketosis more in the winter. And then some people that are insulin resistant aggressively, or have brain issues, or they have other inflammatory problems, they may do better longer term ketosis. So I think there's a room for all these different variables to really tailor it to one specific situation.
Now, do you like people to monitor their ketone levels? Do you really want them to dial in, get a breath device, get a blood device, or are there easier ways for, at home every day figuring this out?
There's the clinical level where the patient or the person, the reader, wants to know for sure. Then the only way you know is to test either a blood meter similar to a glucometer, as you know, a keto meter, or the ketonics like the breathalyzer or the breath meter. Those are the two that we recommend in the book for people who want to measure and make sure they're in it. And I guess if they are dealing with health issues, they may want to track that for themselves. But I like the keeping it simple option. I think for the average reader, they're just going to go by how they feel. And when they start regaining energy and their brain fog is dissipated and they start losing weight and they aren't so hungry and hangry, those are the natural signs that you're in ketosis. Again, we don't know for sure until you test. But if you feel great, most people don't care about the ketone number. They're just caring about their own health goals being achieved.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. Again, I see a lot of people who kind of come into the practice telling me they are in ketosis all the time and that they eat a ketogenic diet, and we monitor their ketones and their fats with every blood test. And the folks who I actually see are not in ketosis are the folks that you talk about that are the high animal meat and fat eaters. And, I think this is actually one of the mistakes that Atkins made. And, Atkins actually started as a high-fat doctor. He was a cardiologist. And he got into such trouble with the American Medical Association that he morphed into being a high-protein doctor. But what he didn't know is that we really have no storage system for protein unless we're actively building muscle, and we don't waste energy. So we convert protein into sugar. And it's so amazing to me, and the number of people who tell me they're doing a ketogenic diet with this high protein diet that still have very high insulin levels, and they're absolutely not in ketosis, even though they walk in and say, oh yeah, I'm constantly in ketosis and I'm on a ketogenic diet. And I go, really? Where is it here?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's what you see as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that gluconeogenesis is a real thing, and these people that are high protein, that's really not ketogenic diet. It's high fat, moderate protein, low carb. So it's definitely important, and depending again on the source of their protein too, the animal proteins, I find the same thing. Their insulin levels are high, they're not stable. Again, they're getting that initial benefit, avoiding of a lot of those inflammatory foods, long-term wellness, I think it has its pitfalls there.
So, I think reading your book, there's clearly a lot of comparisons and commonality between your program and my program, and I think we're all maybe preaching to the same choir. I hope we're getting more parishioners every day. Your diet is remarkably low in lectins, and what do you think people can do to break down the troublesome lectins? What are your tips from the book? Go from there.
Yeah, so it's definitely a problem for people, it's specifically the patient base that we both see with these inflammatory problems. So the easy solution is just de facto, we are avoiding grains. So that's an easy fix. We're removing it from a carb standpoint, but also a lectin standpoint. On two different levels, we are getting rid of grains there. So that's the one lectin problem solved. And then the next solution that I have is soaking nuts and seeds. So the Ketotarian is legume free other than fermented soy for the vegan keto eater. So legumes are gone too. So the only major lectin source there are the nuts and seeds. And I recommend in Ketotarian to soak them, sprout them, make them more digestible, mitigate the lectin and phytic acid there. So that's really the only lectin sources that are there in any abundant level.
Okay. Yeah, if I try to shift my vegans who somehow believe, and you were taught and I was taught at Loma Linda that vegetarians and vegans have to have either a grain or bean source of protein. And apparently nobody ever told that to a gorilla or a horse. They seem to do just fine without it. But for my ketogenic vegans, I try to actually have them use pressure cooked lentils, because lentils have far less sugar content than any of the other beans. But I also let them have fermented soy or pressure cooked soybeans. And I send them to the health food store and get them to buy Eden beans, who really are the only folks that still pressure cook their beans. Or you talk about it in your book. Tell me about the Instant Pot.
Yeah, so people love their Instant Pot. And that's one way to drive down lectin levels as well, make the foods more digestible, for easier on your gut, on the microbiome, the gastrointestinal system. So yes, there's over 81 different recipes in Ketotarian, but there's a section for Instant Pots because people love those. They're convenient because they're quick, but they're also great at mitigating lectin problems.
Yeah, I think particularly for, everybody's working 2 jobs and, you've got 3 kids that you got to get to 27 after school practices. And I think that the Instant Pot has just been a real game changer for, trying to feed your family the way you should feed them, but it's just too easy to, stop at a fast food place on the way home and, pick up a pizza or whatever. But I think the Instant Pot, you can get a full meal on the table in less than a half an hour.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this should be a game changer for families everywhere, and hopefully people like us are even informing people that don't know about it. Look, we are removing the excuses there for people out there and our patients to say this doesn't have to be, you don't have to be Martha Stewart living in the kitchen all day long to be healthy.
That's right. Yeah, and it is interesting that once people try the modern pressure cooker, and an Instant Pot is just one of them, but they don't explode. My mother exploded a pressure cooker when I was growing up, and that was the end of our pressure cooking days. But everybody's got these memories from their grandmother or their mother, and this is not your grandmother's pressure cookers.
No, not at all.
Okay, so you and I in functional medicine have naysayers, and there are certainly naysayers about ketosis. There are clearly naysayers that fat is, the number one evil thing, and they always actually point to Ansel Keys as saying that fat is evil. and somehow that never got mentioned that he loved olive oil. But so what do you say to your naysayers?
Well,
here's your chance.
This is my chance. I would say that we're focusing on real food fats, plant-based fats. That way you look at traditional societies around the world and throughout history, cultures thrived on these. So we're talking olives and olive oil, avocados, avocado oil, wild-caught fish. These are things that most people can get behind. And I think that that's going to start diffusing the dogma and the vitriol when people are judging things without actually reading and finding out what they're judging. So this is a really a way to use food as medicine to feel great. It's all real food. It's not anything radical. People are eating until they're satiated. I think a lot of the hyperbole that's out there, they're actually not looking at how logical this way of eating is. And ultimately, I think people should try it for themselves before they judge something.
You got any words of advice for the ultra low fat vegans that you and I know?
Yeah. And it's funny that I think a lot of those ultra low fat vegans are, I don't know if it's publicly, but privately experimenting with fasting mimicking diets and intermittent fasting and more plant-based fats. I think a lot of them are coming around and realizing, look, doesn't have to be us versus them. It really we can find that commonality between we all want to feel great, we all want to have optimal health, and when they start looking in their own labs and start seeing insulin levels come up or triglycerides coming up or their gut not so healthy, they're going to start realizing they're going to have to start looking at other plant-based food options out there that are still plant-based, but for the sake of their health, they have to start coming up with different options. Obviously, everybody's different. Some are talking about every low-fat vegan, but some notable ones I think are coming around to more of a moderate view for plant-based fats.
No, I think that's true, and even Dean Ornish really thinks that you have to get long-chain omega-3 fats in your diet, and whether it's from fish oil or whether it's from now algae-based DHA and EPA, I think good for him. I think he's realizing that clearly there are some benefits of at least one long-chain omega-3 fat or two. So. And that's what I think we should all do. My original book was called Dr. Gundry's Diet Evolution, because my thinking hopefully evolves as the more I learn from my patients. And I think we always have to be flexible. The plant paradox was clearly evolved from my first book, and you read the two and you go, well, you said that was okay. Well, 10 years later and a couple thousand patients later, oops, look at this. Yeah. So I hope we all chat with each other. As you know, a colleague of ours, Joel Kahn, came out pretty nasty against me early, but we've actually found that we have a lot of commonality besides training at the University of Michigan. So I think there's always hope that once we all start talking to each other, like you say, we're all looking for the same thing, and we're all looking for long-term health for our patients. And what we're all looking for is health span. There's nothing worse than making it to 90 and being in a wheelchair and drooling in your oatmeal at the senior center. What we want to be doing is being 90 and actively. I'll tell you a really quick story. My uncle is now 91, and he sent me a picture a few weeks ago of him cleaning the barnacles off of his 42-foot sailing boat in the water. And he climbs the masts at 91 to rig the sails. And I'll tell you, he's been on my program for over 15 years now, and it's just fantastic. I mean, that's what I want to do when I'm 91.
Yes. What a blessing. How cool is that? That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so we got an audience question that's got sent in, and this came in from our social media. And if you'd like to have your question answered on an up-and-coming podcast, use hashtag Ask Dr. Gundry. Ask Gundry, sorry. So this is from Susan C. And I won't give your address, Susan. Dr. Gundry, what are your thoughts about the studies and findings of a low-carb diet and coconut oil? Oh yeah, this is on the ketogenic sites everywhere. So, Will, since you're my guest, you get first crack at this.
Yeah. So I think for both of these, well, let's just say the low-carb diet first, and that's definitely going around on the blogosphere and hitting the news wires out there, that correlation doesn't equate causation. And I think you make broad sweeping statements that make for good headlines, but if you read the data of what they're talking about, it's actually not that sensational, and you really are extrapolating evidence just to prove a point. And there's definitely unhealthy ways to go low carb. And just because something's high fat, low carb doesn't mean it's healthy. And I think that's part of the reason why we write our books and why I wrote Ketotarian specifically for myself. And to the coconut oil, that is the same old as far as the diet hard hypothesis, is that eating coconut oil or this plant-based saturated fat increases total serum cholesterol. Then the conclusion is made that that is bad, because anything that raises total serum cholesterol is bad. Now, we know that total serum cholesterol is a pretty poor predictor for assessing cardiovascular risk factors. So we, in functional medicine, look at small dense LDL particles, or these oxidized inflammatory particles that are actually protein that carry cholesterol around. High triglycerides, we don't want that. We don't want low HDL. We don't want high inflammation levels like CRP and homocysteine, and we don't want high insulin. What the research shows is that coconut oil actually increases large buoyant LDL, the non-oxidized, the fluffy buoyant protective LDL particles when we run the NMR tests, and that it increases HDL. The one caveat are people with gut lining problems that aren't eating plants, aren't eating non-starchy vegetables. Those people eating a lot of saturated fat doesn't mean they can't have any, but limiting it. If they have a lot of saturated fat and low plant fiber, that can increase the lipopolysaccharide-driven inflammation levels for some people. And then we know the ApoE4 gene mutation, these people with these genetic polymorphisms depending a lot on saturated fat, low on plant food, that can also raise inflammation levels and cardiovascular and Alzheimer's risk factors. But that's lumping and being oversimplistic with coconut oil. And I wouldn't say just have coconut oil all day, every day anyways. It should be a part of this, but I'm definitely a bigger fan for the monounsaturated fat as a predominant source of plant fats.
Yeah, me too. And as you know, one of my favorite sayings is the only purpose of food is to get olive oil into your mouth. And Italians taught me that. Yeah, I'd add to that you know, I see a lot of people with the ApoE4 mutation. They're drawn to my clinic, and I think looking at their blood work over the last 15 years, I'm suspicious that these folks coconut oil should probably not be a big part of their diet. But absolutely, animal saturated fats, I think, are the big mischief maker in these people. And I'm always reminded, there's a beautiful ongoing study between Nigerian blacks and blacks who live in Indianapolis. And Nigerians carry the highest rate of the ApoE4 mutation of any people. And yet they have actually no Alzheimer's disease. And so there's been this tracking study of people with the ApoE4 mutation in Nigeria and Indianapolis. And lo and behold, I think it's going into its 20th year. The Nigerians do not have Alzheimer's, and of course, unfortunately, the American blacks eating our kind of high-fat Western diet are developing Alzheimer's kind of right on schedule, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting. The Nigerians eat a very plant-based diet. Their main grain is millet, which, as you and I know, does not have lectins. Millet and sorghum are lectin-free because they actually don't have a hull. And it's fascinating that, you know, they have the gene, but they don't get Alzheimer's. And you mentioned this in your book, that our genetic fate is actually a very tiny piece of our overall fate. And most of our fate, coming back to you, lies in our gut and in what's happening at the gut wall. And that's what actually is the whole book on the longevity paradox. So, great discussion. Thanks for coming on the show. How do people find you? How do they get the book?
Everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com. It's obviously the book information's on the website as well, and it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, everything there. And Dr. Gundry, can I just say thank you so much for having me on. You are a thought leader and one of my heroes, and I'm honored to have this conversation with you.
Well, keep up the good work, keep the voice going. We're all for you, Will, and good luck with the book, and I know it's going to be great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. So this is Dr. Gundry signing out from the Dr. Gundry Podcast. I'm always looking out for you.